Sophia Carter had built her life on precision. At 35, she had perfected the image of stability so thoroughly that even those closest to her never questioned it. Brookfield High regarded her as dependable and composed, the kind of teacher parents trusted without hesitation. Her colleagues admired her discipline, her calm authority, her ability to manage everything without visible strain. At home, she was Michael's wife. Predictable, organized, reliable. Their marriage followed a steady rhythm of routine conversations, scheduled dinners, and shared silence that felt safe, if not particularly alive. From the outside, nothing appeared broken, but perfection, when sustained too long, has a way of turning inward. Sophia rarely allowed herself to examine the quiet dissatisfaction that followed her through the days. It wasn't sadness or anger, not something she could point to and name. It was subtler than that, a dull sense of repetition, a feeling that her life was moving forward without actually changing. She told herself it was adulthood, responsibility, maturity. Everyone felt this way eventually, didn't they? Comforted her enough to keep going, enough to keep pretending she wasn't slowly suffocating under her own discipline. Everything shifted when Ethan Mills returned to Brookfield High. She recognized him immediately, though she hadn't expected to. Years had passed since he'd been her student, but memory has a strange way of preserving certain faces. Wash, differing, older, more confident, carrying himself with the ease of someone no longer seeking approval. As a teaching assistant, his presence was professional, unremarkable on the surface. And yet, from their very first interaction, Sophia felt an unease she couldn't explain. Not attraction, not yet, but awareness. Their conversations began innocently. Curriculum planning, student performance, administrative logistics. Sophia maintained distance, reminding herself of boundaries that had guided her career without fail. But repetition, soft caution, familiarity crept in quietly, disguising itself as comfort. Ethan lingered after discussions. Eye contact lasted a second too long. Silence between them felt heavier than words. Sophia noticed it. That was the most dangerous part. She noticed and did nothing. Late evenings became more frequent. The school, emptied of noise and movement, took on a different atmosphere after hours. Hallways echoed faintly. Classrooms felt enclosed, insulated from the outside world. Sophia justified staying late with work she could have easily taken home. Ethan justified staying late by offering help. Neither acknowledged the real reason. The night everything changed did not announce itself with drama. There was no argument, no sudden confession. Just proximity, a shared frustration, a laugh that lingered too long, a moment of hesitation that should have ended differently. The decision wasn't planned, it was surrendered to, and once crossed, the line disappeared entirely. Sophia told herself it was a mistake, a lapse, something isolated and containable. But mistakes don't repeat themselves so easily. Days passed, then weeks, and the secrecy became its own reward. Each hidden encounter sharpened a thrill, drowning out logic and consequence. She knew what she was risking: her job, her marriage, her reputation, but the danger only intensified the feeling she'd been missing for years. She felt sen, desired, awaked out at home. Michael noticed little at first. He trusted Sophia implicitly, believing in the life they had constructed together. Their conversations remained polite, routine, undisturbed. But absence has weight, and silence has texture. The house felt emptier, though nothing tangible had changed. Michael attributed it to work stress, long hours, fatigue. Trust has a way of excusing what suspicion would question. Sophia's confidence grew with each risk taken and not punished. She convinced herself she was careful, intelligent, in control. That belief hardened into arrogance. The affair was no longer something happening to her, it was something she managed. That illusion of control became intoxicating. When Leia noticed the change, it was inevitable. Friendship breeds observation, and Sophia had grown careless. A glance interrupted too quickly. A conversation abruptly ended. Leia's curiosity turned into quiet probing, then pressure Sophia wasn't prepared for. The confession came reluctantly, fragmented, wrapped in excuses. Sophia expected judgment, disappointment, rejection. Instead, she saw interest. That reaction shifted something fundamental. What should have ended the affair expanded it. Secrecy multiplied, boundaries eroded further. One reckless choice made the next easier, and slowly, almost Sophia's private indulgence transformed into something far more dangerous. She didn't see the trap forming. She didn't hear the warning signs, and she didn't notice the moment Michael stopped being unaware and started watching. By the time she did, the damage was already irreversible. The days following Leia's discovery passed with an uneasy tension that Sophia tried desperately to ignore. Her interactions at Brookfield High continued as usual, a mask of calm and professionalism, concealing the storm that brewed beneath the surface. Every smile, every casual remark, every nod to a colleague became measured, calculated, as if the walls themselves had begun to judge her. Yet, the secret circle, now more dangerous and thrilling than ever, pulled her in with increasing insistence. The allure of risk had evolved into an obsession, a magnetic force she could neither resist nor escape. The thrill of secrecy, once a fleeting indulgence, had anchored itself at the core of her daily existence. Leia's presence had intensified everything. The librarian's curiosity had transformed into a complicity that both unnerved and excited Sophia. The two women navigated their encounters with a sense of daring, aware of the potential consequences but driven by the intoxicating pleasure of defiance. Oliver and Miranda, colleagues drawn in by circumstance or temptation, became unwilling participants in this carefully orchestrated chaos. And Thomas, quietly enamored with Sophia for years, finally revealed the depth of his feelings through silent observation and subtle engagement. Each new participant added complexity, weaving a web of desire, secrecy, and subtle manipulation that left Sophia enthralled and alarmingly confident in her control. Michael remained an unobserved variable. He continued his routines at the law firm, leaving the house quiet in the evenings. Sophia noted his absence as opportunity. Assuming that distance equaled disengagement, she misread the quiet, interpreting patience for weakness, observation for disinterest. But Michael's silence was deliberate. He was watching, studying, cataloging every infraction with meticulous care. Every late arrival, every lingering touch, every whispered joke between conspirators did not escape him. Cameras were placed, subtle yet comprehensive. Small inconsistencies in behavior were logged mentally. Each day added to a ledger of betrayal that Michael did not yet confront, but which would become a weapon of precision when the time came. It was during a routine evening of clandestine gathering that the true depth of Sophia's recklessness became apparent. The group convened in the familiar privacy of the school library under the pretense of tutoring sessions and project planning. The air was charged, heavy with the unspoken thrill of danger. Each participant felt it. The exhilaration of hiding in plain sight, the energy of forbidden indulgence coursing beneath every word, every glance, every accidental brush of skin. Sophia thrived in this atmosphere, misinterpreting fear for excitement, boldness for strategy. The illusion of invincibility had taken root. Michael's unexpected presence shattered that illusion. He had chosen the moment deliberately, arriving silently, unseen, allowing the group to fully commit to their own folly before stepping into the frame of reality. The shock of seeing Hema Man assumed to be absent imbued the room with instantaneous fear. Not loud, not dramatic, just a cold, controlled presence that radiated authority and judgment. Every participant froze, their carefully rehearsed bravado collapsing into helplessness. The calmness of his observation was far more terrifying than any raised voice could have been. Sophia's first instinct was panic, then denial, then defiance. But Michael did not engage with emotion. He engaged with evidence. The tablet he revealed displayed footage that was impossible to dispute. Moments captured in sharp clarity, every act documented with precision. The room, once a sanctuary of secret pleasure, became a chamber of inescapable consequence. The laughter, the whispered promises, the playful arrogance-all were rendered meaningless under the weight of incontrovertible proof. Sophia's mind raced, seeking an argument, an excuse, a loophole, but found only the realization that she had misjudged Michael's patience entirely. One by one, Michael addressed each participant with measured words, stripping away pretense and exposing the vulnerability they had ignored for weeks. Ethan's confidence dissolved into panic. Leia's composure fractured under quiet intimidation. Oliver and Miranda's bravado crumbled into pleas for mercy. Thomas's quiet courage faltered under the weight of exposure. Sophia's face mirrored horror, disbelief, and finally, the heavy acknowledgement of her own role in orchestrating this unraveling. Michael's strategy was clear, methodical, precise, and devoid of unnecessary cruelty. Each person was confronted with the inescapable truth that secrecy had limits and betrayal carried a price far higher than they had imagined. Despite the confrontation, Sophia's hubris persisted. Fear ignited caution for some, but for her, the thrill had become a need, an addiction. She believed herself untouchable, imagining that cleverness and charm could outmaneuver scrutiny. The irony was brutal. The very intelligence that had allowed her to manipulate her lovers and conceal her affairs was now feeding the meticulous web Michael had constructed around her. Every lie, every hidden rendezvous, every whisper of pleasure was catalogued, and her arrogance blinded her to the inevitability of consequence. Days stretched into weeks, each clandestine meeting bringing with it the illusion of freedom, while Michael's silent observation tightened the trap. Evidence accumulated, not as a threat, but as an unbreakable framework, waiting for the moment when patience would give way to action. Michael did not need confrontation. He needed clarity, precision, and the perfect timing to transform surveillance into resolution. Sophia's indulgence, her need for validation, her obsession with secrecy, all continued unaware of the meticulous structure being laid for their eventual reckoning. In the midst of this, Sophia's own perception of power became dangerously distorted. The thrill of control, of orchestrating secret encounters without detection, convinced her that she was untouchable. She misread Michael's calm as absence of engagement, interpreting surveillance as neglect. Her circle of lovers became complicit, emboldened by shared secrecy, believing themselves clever enough to evade the consequences. And yet, Michael's preparation rendered them predictable. Every behavior catalogued, every movement anticipated. He did not act in haste or fury. He acted with strategy and patience, knowing the full scope of their recklessness would unfold exactly as he had anticipated. By the end of the chapter, the dynamics within the Carter home and the Brookfield High Circle had shifted irreversibly. What had begun as a singular act of desire and indiscretion had expanded into a network of complicity, obsession, and danger, all under the watchful eyes of the one person Sophia had underestimated most. Her husband. Michael's silent observation was no longer passive. It had become a calculated instrument, poised to transform weeks of indulgence into a reckoning of extraordinary precision. The illusion of invincibility that Sophia had cultivated through charm, manipulation, and secrecy was now poised on the edge of collapse. The thrill that had fueled her obsession was about to collide with the inevitability of consequence. Sophia awoke the following morning with the faint echo of fear still clinging to her. The previous night's confrontation, though silent in its aftermath, had left an indelible mark on her psyche. She told herself it was nothing that Michael's calm had been a warning, not an ultimatum, but... Even as she rehearsed excuses and rationalizations in her mind, a creeping unease refused to dissipate. She moved through her routine with forced composure, the meticulous scheduling that had always given her a sense of control, now feeling brittle and hollow. Every glance at the clock, every note she graded, every polite smile to colleagues carried a shadow of dread she could neither name nor avoid. The thrill of indulgence was no longer pure. It was interlaced with anxiety that gnawed at the edges of her excitement. Her lovers, too, had sensed the shift. Ethan, once bold and confident, now glanced nervously at shadows, scanning corridors and empty classrooms for signs of intrusion. Leia's smirk had softened, her laughter forced and uneven, revealing cracks in the bravado she had worn so carefully. Oliver and Miranda exchanged subtle, anxious glances, their previous ease replaced by cautious hesitation. Even Thomas, whose quiet devotion had seemed steadfast, appeared tense and uncertain, as though he had glimpsed the fragility of the elaborate web they had woven. Yet Sophia persisted in her reckless disregard, clinging to the illusion that cleverness could outmaneuver vigilance. Each planned rendezvous, each whispered promise, each carefully orchestrated encounter became a calculated gamble she believed she could control. Michael, however, was no longer a passive observer. His patience, long mistaken for disengagement, had evolved into deliberate strategy. He did not intervene rashly or angrily. Instead, he catalogued every movement, every conversation, every nuance of behavior. Hidden cameras, carefully positioned, had captured more than just physical indiscretions. They had documented expressions, hesitation, even the subtle interplay of power within the group. His mind catalogued patterns of behavior, noting how Sophia's confidence led to recklessness, how her circle had begun to mirror her disregard for consequences. By the time he chose to act, he would not need fury or confrontation. The moment would arrive precisely when he determined that it was complete and inevitable. Despite the warning implicit in Michael's presence, Sophia could not resist temptation. Desire, obsession, and the intoxicating sense of control continued to dictate her decisions. She arranged another evening gathering, this time under the guise of project planning in the master bedroom, but with intentions far more clandestine. The participants arrived with familiarity, almost comfort, unaware of the meticulous surveillance that had recorded each of their past indiscretions. Laughter and whispered words filled the room, the thrill of forbidden engagement resurgent. Yet every smile, every gesture, every subtle glance had already been catalogued. Michael's unseen presence in the previous hours, the possibility thereof, was already weighing silently upon them, a specter that none dared acknowledge fully. Sophia's arrogance grew with each risk. She believed herself untouchable, convinced that Michael's patience had limits she could exploit, that his calm had a breaking point she could manipulate. The paradox of desire and recklessness created an intoxicating feedback loop. Fear fueled pleasure, secrecy intensified indulgence, and the thrill of evasion became its own justification. Yet each meeting, each encounter, each whispered conversation was another step along a path she could no longer redirect. The web of complicity had expanded beyond control. Where once it had been a secret confined to moments, it now permeated her life, reshaping her environment, her thoughts, and her perception of power. Michael's strategy unfolded silently, like the slow tightening of a noose. He began confronting participants individually, not with dramatics, but with precise, undeniable evidence. Ethan was first, cornered in the law firm office one evening, presented with footage and documentation so clear there was no room for denial. The confidence he had exhibited in Sophia's presence dissolved instantly, replaced by fear and humiliation. Michael's words were deliberate, measured, each syllable a demonstration of control. He did not threaten rashly. He allowed certainty and consequence to speak for themselves. The lesson for Ethan was immediate. Freedom from accountability was an illusion, and the cost of betrayal was inescapable. Sophia, unaware of the full scope of Michael's actions, continued to plan further meetings. Each gathering was bolder, more daring, and increasingly reckless. She believed herself clever, assuming that her charm, strategy, and ability to manipulate circumstance rendered her untouchable. She misjudged the meticulous nature of Michael's planning, underestimating the patience and precision required to transform observation into justice. With every act of indulgence, she brought the circle closer to the inevitable reckoning. The thrill of desire blinded her to the structural inevitability of consequence. Within the house, tension accumulated like pressure behind a sealed door. Every interaction was layered with potential risk. Every shared smile an unacknowledged threat. Michael's presence, though silent, loomed over the events of the day and night alike. He did not announce himself, did not intervene in the moment, but the knowledge of his vigilance transformed the space, adding a psychological weight that Sophia could not perceive fully. Her obsession with indulgence had become her own cage, and every attempt at freedom only reinforced the invisible bars of anticipation and consequence. By the end of the chapter, the dynamics of power had shifted imperceptibly, but irrevocably. The group, once emboldened by secrecy, had become increasingly vulnerable. Their behaviors predictable, their interactions documented. Sophia, though still blinded by desire and hubris, was unwittingly navigating a landscape defined by observation and patience. Michael's calm, measured approach had not only neutralized opportunity but had converted every indiscretion into a strategic advantage. The thrill that once dominated their lives had become a ticking clock. Each moment bringing the inevitable collision of recklessness and consequence ever closer. The night ended without dramatic confrontation, but the weight of impending reckoning settled in the minds of all participants, even those unaware of its full scope. Sophia, though still intoxicated by thrill and desire, sensed an underlying tension she could not explain. The house, once a sanctuary of indulgence and secrecy, had transformed subtly into a domain of calculated observation. Every action, every choice, every whispered promise was now part of a growing ledger, poised to manifest in consequence. The stage was set, the players in motion, and the invisible hand guiding events was both patient and unyielding. In that silence, one truth became impossible to ignore. Indulgence has limits, secrecy has bounds, and the most meticulous patience can become the most formidable instrument of consequence. Sophia's obsession, her reckless confidence, and her manipulation of desire had not been without cost, though she could not yet see the full scope. The eventual collapse of control had already begun, and nothing, no charm, no secrecy, no audacity could prevent the reckoning that was fast approaching. The days that followed were a careful dance between indulgence and dread, though Sophia hardly recognized the pattern forming around her. Each morning began with rehearsed composure, the kind she had perfected over decades, yet beneath the surface, unease had rooted itself. Every glance she cast at Michael, every casual question about his schedule, every polite smile, hiding exhaustion or distraction, carried a weight she could not articulate. She convinced herself that she was in control, that the thrill of secrecy and desire could still dominate, yet fragments of anxiety punctured her illusions in fleeting, undeniable moments, even in the quiet of her own home, where she had once felt sovereign over her world of secrets. She began to sense that she was no longer the orchestrator. Observation had shifted the balance of power, though she refused to admit it. Her lovers, entangled in the web she had spun, mirrored her own oblivion with varying degrees of unease. Ethan, once bold and defiant, had become cautious, his energy taut to his suppressed fear, the occasional tremor betraying the knowledge that the calm they had once interpreted as ignorance was actually vigilance. Leia's laughter no longer carried the same audacity. It now trembled on the edge of awareness, a fleeting acknowledgement that risk had grown beyond playfulness. Oliver and Miranda, whose complicity had seemed harmless at first, now moved with measured hesitation, their eyes darting to the corners of rooms. Two shadows, as though the walls themselves might expose them. Thomas, who had long maintained a quiet devotion to Sophia, now carried the weight of uncertainty alongside desire, the tension between loyalty and survival marking every interaction. Together, they formed a circle no longer bound by passion alone, but by an unspoken, growing terror they could not articulate. Sophia's arrogance persisted, even in the presence of subtle warning signs. The thrill of mastery, of controlling situations that others might falter in, had become addictive. She believed herself clever, infallible, untouchable, a queen navigating a court of willing subjects. She misread every pause, every absence of confrontation, as weakness, as leniency, as permission to continue. The irony was cruel. The very intelligence that had guided her secretive maneuvers was also fueling the construction of a meticulously observed framework, a trap she could not yet perceive. Every whispered promise, every carefully arranged encounter, every nuanced flirtation was being catalogued, logged, and rendered into evidence of a recklessness that had grown beyond her comprehension. Michael's patience, previously a silent threat, had evolved into deliberate preparation. He did not act in haste, nor did he reveal the full breadth of his knowledge. Instead, he allowed events to unfold naturally, letting the patterns of indulgence and recklessness guide Sophia and her lovers toward predictable behavior. Each misstep, each indulgence, each display of unguarded confidence strengthened the architecture of inevitable consequence. His silence was a tool, his calm a weapon, and his observation transformed into a precise, almost ritualistic anticipation of what was to come. That evening, Sophia arranged another gathering, this time more daring than any before. The participants arrived under the guise of study, discussion, and project preparation. Yet the true nature of the meeting lay in desire and shared secrecy. The room was alive with the familiar charge, the thrill of evasion, the intoxicating sense of power and concealment. Laughter was louder, whispers more intimate. Toscius more deliberate. Sophia reveled in the perception of control, convincing herself that clever planning and shared loyalty could defy the subtle gravity of risk. The room, however, was already under the quiet, omnipresent scrutiny of Michael's unseen observation, every action catalogued, every choice rendered predictable. Her indulgence had blinded her to the growing precision of consequence. She failed to recognize that every smile, every pause, every subtle glance had already been recorded, analyzed, and transformed into evidence. Her sense of invincibility persisted even as the subtle pressure of inevitability tightened around her circle like a slowly drawn noose. What had begun as pleasure now carried an undertone of latent threat, though she misread it consistently, interpreting caution as excitement, fear as complicity. Her hubris had become her prison, a self-constructed labyrinth